recording. You're all set. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Kotowicz. I'm a relatively new addition to the climate change resilience team here at the Coastal Resources Center. And one of the first things that I was involved in was setting up these meetings in each of the Washington County coastal municipalities. And they started in October and went through, and the last one in South Kingstown was in January. Municipal decision makers were contacted by us, and they made the decision whether they wanted to open it up to a public discussion or just keep it to council members, board members, people who are really involved in the day-to-day decision making that coastal counties have to go through. So there were two really different kinds of conversations that we had in those 6 communities. The first thing we did was really review the beach stamp process, and for those of you that have been following the process, you know about a lot of these things already, and the purpose of the beach stamp and the tools that are being developed, and specifically looking at how those tools can benefit coastal communities in planning for climate change impacts. And along the way, we collected feedback from the participants from a variety of different ways. The first way was when participants arrived, we asked them to write on a Post-it note what their biggest concern was about climate change and natural hazards in their communities. We also, had extensive discussion with the participants where we discussed with them what their biggest concerns were, what their biggest barriers were, and then in some communities we used little clickers for electronic polling, and that only worked in some communities, but it really did give us a good idea of what things resonated and what things were less popular when we were talking to people about adaptation strategies. So what things coastal communities could do to deal with the projected impacts of climate change and natural hazards. So these were the 10 strategies that Teresa really went into detail about. And the first couple are more like vulnerability assessment type work. The middle, from I would say 3 until about 8, are more planning processes, policy changes, and then 9 and 10 really involve, 9 a little bit and 10 really involve changes in the way people live in coastal communities. So it ranged from really kind of easy things that coastal communities are probably pretty familiar with, down to 10, which could be really controversial, increasing open space and reducing density in at-risk areas, which are often coastal areas, which are often the most highly sought after areas of living and to live in coastal communities. So we asked a variety of different questions about these adaptations, and one of them was, what are the 3 strategies that they think are most likely to be implemented in their town? And we were really surprised that in a lot of communities, the increasing open space and reducing density in at-risk areas came out on top. This is just an example of one town's responses, but it was pretty often that people responded that was a thing that was likely to be implemented, and surprising to, I think, everybody in the room. The other things that were really common were the vulnerability assessment type activities, so identifying the areas at risk and developing a database of at-risk areas. So these are I started talking about the most likely to be implemented strategies, and those are the identifying areas at risk in the database of exposed properties, also an emergency permitting process for post-storm recovery and rebuilding. That's a really important way that a town can help both emergency personnel and coastal property owners to rebuild as quickly and efficiently as possible. And it was often identified as the most likely to be implemented. We asked which ones would be most cost effective, and again, a lot of participants responded that identifying the areas at risk, and then incentives for voluntary adaptation. And that included things like incentivizing elevating your home if it's likely to be inundated by floodwaters. Then again, the emergency permitting process in post-storm scenarios, and increasing open space and reducing density was identified as one of the most cost-effective. Finally, we asked people to identify which strategies they wanted more information about, and the two most common ones were planning for storm and sea level rise impacts to infrastructure, and increasing open space and reducing density. So these are really were the ones that we in looking forward are thinking about going back and talking to municipalities further. In addition to these strategies, there were really a few common concerns in all of the municipalities, and one of them was addressed by the Section 145 language that Grover was just discussing earlier. Municipal planners specifically really wanted clear direction on planning horizons. What sea level rise should they plan for, and for what years? And that's exactly what Section 145 is doing, and so it answers their questions, addresses their concerns very well. Another concern was roadway management and coordination with the Department of Transportation, and in conjunction with that was stormwater management. In almost every community we went to, when we talked about infrastructure, it really surrounded roadways and stormwater management. And if the stormwater isn't managed well, how can we maintain the roadways? And the conflicting management over roadways. And this is a conversation that's ongoing with municipalities. The other thing is financing adaptation. It's a perpetual problem. Financing adaptation efforts is often something that there's no support for it, except right after an emergency. And right after emergency, we have to rebuild. And so we're working with municipalities on how to lay the groundwork for a financing adaptation in the future. And along with that comes communicating the importance of taking those steps to decision makers. Finally, designating where not to rebuild. In every community, this conversation came up. How do we make it so that if the properties that are at risk are damaged, we can tell them, don't rebuild anymore? And there's not a great answer at this point. But we are making progress in a bunch of these areas. As I mentioned, CRMC's policy for Section 145 is going into effect later this month. And the statewide planning comp plan handbooks address how municipal planners can plan for different scenarios with regard to natural hazards and climate change impacts. Regarding roadway management, the Transportation Incentive Program proposals went in at the beginning of this year, and it was recommended to use storm tools to prioritize those projects, those proposals. And people really considered the impacts of climate change and natural hazards when designing those proposals in several municipalities. Regarding stormwater management, there's a green infrastructure pilot projects. In what communities are they, Teresa? Okay, that the beach SAMP is currently undertaking, and we hope that the lessons learned from those projects can be used in other municipalities. In terms of financing adaptation and communicating the importance to decision makers, that's what we do every day, and we'll continue doing that as best we can. Finally, in discussing where not to rebuild, one of the biggest questions is legal ramifications. There's issues of eminent domain and takings concerns, and there was a legal workshop in last December 1st, during which a lot of these issues were discussed, and I see a few people in the room that were part of it and researching ongoing concerns that were brought up there to hopefully bring them back to municipal solicitors, thank you,